Why haven't you touched me yet? My alien wife suddenly asked. The door to their shared quarters slid open with its familiar pneumatic hiss, and Kale stepped inside, exhaustion settling into his bones like lead. Another 14-hour shift managing cultural exchange protocols between the human delegation and the Zarathi Council. Another day of careful diplomacy, precise language, and the constant awareness that every word, every gesture, carried the weight of two civilizations learning to coexist. He loosened the collar of his diplomatic uniform, barely registering the soft amber lighting that Thesha preferred, a compromise between Earth's harsh whites and the gentle bioluminescence of her homeworld. The quarters were immaculate as always. She had a way of making even this sterile vessel feel almost lived in, with carefully arranged textiles from Zarath Prime draped over the regulation furniture and small holographic projections of alien landscapes rotating slowly in the corners. Long day. Her voice came from the seating area, musical and layered with harmonics that still sometimes caught him off guard, even after 8 months of marriage. The longest, Kale replied, managing a tired smile as he turned to face her. Ambassador Chen wanted to review every treaty clause again. I think we're going to be negotiating trade routes until we're both ancient. Thesha sat on the curved couch, her silver hair cascading over shoulders that seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim light, a quality of Zarathi skin that he'd learned was perfectly normal, though it never failed to mesmerize him. She wore one of the flowing garments her people favored, deep blue like midnight oceans, and her eyes, those striking violet eyes with their subtle inner glow, watched him with an intensity that made his breath catch. Kale. She stood slowly, gracefully, and there was something different in her posture. Something decided. We need to talk. His stomach tightened. Those words carried weight in any language and any culture. Of course. Is something wrong? Did the council? Why haven't you touched me yet? The question landed like a physical blow, stopping his words mid-flight. Kale stood frozen, his hand still raised in the gesture he'd been making, his mind suddenly, completely blank. He had no idea what to say. Thesha took a step closer, and he could see the vulnerability in her expression now, the careful courage it had taken to ask. We've been married for 8 months, Kale. We share these quarters, we share meals, we attend functions together. You are kind and courteous and thoughtful. She paused and something flickered across her face, hurt, perhaps, or confusion. But you avoid touching me like I carry some disease. You flinch when I come near. When I reach for you, you find reasons to move away. That's not, I don't. Kale ran a hand through his hair, feeling heat rise in his face. Thesha, it's complicated. Then uncomplicated for me. She was directly in front of him now, close enough that he could see the faint patterns in her skin that resembled constellations, the way her chest rose and fell with breaths that were slightly faster than usual. In my culture, physical closeness is honest. It's natural. It's how we show trust, affection, connection. I've tried to understand your ways, truly I have. I've read about human customs, about your need for, what do you call it? Personal space. Her voice softened and she lifted one hand, slender fingers that ended in subtle points rather than rounded tips, letting it hover in the space between them without making contact. But we're not strangers anymore, Kale. Or we shouldn't be. Yet you treat me like I'm made of glass. Like I'm some diplomatic obligation you must handle carefully but never truly engage with. Her luminous eyes searched his face. I've waited. I've been patient. But I need to know, is it me? Is it my appearance? Do I repulse you somehow? No. The word burst from him, sharp and immediate. God, no, Thesha. That's not it at all. Then what? The question was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the space between them. What am I doing wrong? Kale's heart hammered against his ribs. How could he explain the paralysis that seized him every time he thought about reaching for her? The fear that lived in his chest like a cold stone? She was so beautiful it hurt to look at her sometimes, so graceful and genuine that he felt like a clumsy imposter beside her. Their marriage had been arranged, a political alliance sealed with ancient protocols and modern treaties, but somewhere in these 8 months, his feelings had become desperately, terrifyingly real. You're not doing anything wrong, he said finally, his voice rough. It's me. I'm afraid. Of me. Of disappointing you. The confession came out broken, honest. Thesha, I don't know how to be what you need. She tilted her head slightly, a gesture he'd learned meant she was processing something unexpected. What I need, she said slowly, is for my husband to see me. To acknowledge that I'm here, that I'm real, she stopped, something vulnerable crossing her features. That I matter to you as more than a treaty signature. The space between them felt electric, charged with months of unspoken words and careful distance. Kale could feel the warmth radiating from her, could see the slight tremor in that still raised hand, could hear the hope and fear tangled in her voice. "You do," he whispered. "You matter so much that it terrifies me." For a long moment they simply stood there, suspended in the amber light, two people from different worlds trying to find a bridge across the vast space of their own making. Cultural divide. Thesha's hand finally dropped to her side, and she took a small step back, giving him space even as her expression remained open, waiting. "Tell me," she said softly. "Help me understand this terror." Kale moved to the viewport, needing something to look at besides those penetrating violet eyes. Outside, stars streaked past in the gentle distortion of faster-than-light travel, countless points of light blurring into rivers of silver. He pressed his palm against the cool glass. "On Earth," he began, choosing his words carefully, "physical intimacy it's layered, sequential. There are steps, stages. You don't skip ahead. You build trust first through words, through time, through shared experiences. Only then do you." He gestured vaguely, feeling inadequate. "Only then do you allow yourself to be physically close. It's how we protect ourselves. How we know it's real and not just convenience." "But we are married," Thesha pointed out, moving to stand beside him at the viewport, though she maintained careful distance. "Doesn't that constitute trust in your culture? A marriage that was arranged by councils and ambassadors." Kale's reflection in the glass looked tired, uncertain. "A marriage that neither of us chose freely. I didn't want you to feel obligated, trapped. Like I was taking advantage of the situation." He heard her soft intake of breath, that particular harmonic that indicated surprise. "Taking advantage? Kale, I was the one who asked for you." Now it was his turn to be surprised. He turned to face her fully. "What?" Thesha's skin shimmered with what he'd learned was a flush, embarrassment made visible. "When the marriage alliance was proposed, I was given files on 12 potential candidates from the human delegation. Scientists, diplomats, military officers. I chose you." She met his eyes directly. "I watched your cultural briefing videos. I read your personnel files, the official ones and the personal notes from your colleagues. I learned that you were kind to junior staff members, that you defended a Zarathi engineer when others questioned his methods, that you spent your free time learning our language rather than just relying on translators." She moved closer, deliberate now, claiming space. "I chose you, Kale Winters, because you seemed like someone who might see me as more than just an alien bride. Someone who might eventually—" She paused, vulnerability flickering across her features again. "Someone I could eventually love." The confession hung in the air between them, brave and terrifying. "I didn't know," Kale said, his voice rough with emotion. "They told me it was a random selection. Political balance. I thought you were just making the best of an assignment. And I thought you were counting the days until this posting ended and you could return to Earth, free of your alien obligation." Thesha's laugh was bitter and musical all at once. "We are quite a pair, aren't we? Both so careful, both so afraid, both assuming the worst." Kale remembered the wedding, a strange hybrid ceremony combining human and Zarathi traditions. He'd been so focused on not making a diplomatic mistake that he'd barely looked at her. And afterward, returning to these quarters for the first time, the awkward discussion about sleeping arrangements. Separate beds, they'd agreed. Professional courtesy. Give each other space. What a coward he'd been. In Zarathi culture, Thesha continued, her voice taking on the rhythm of a teacher, something he recognized from when she explained her people's customs during formal events. Physical touch is how we communicate emotion. It's our most honest language. A touch on the shoulder means solidarity. Intertwined fingers mean trust. Holding someone close means you've chosen them, that they matter, that they're part of your constellation. She demonstrated with her own hands, weaving her fingers together. We don't hide behind walls of words. We don't wait for perfect certainty before we show affection. That sounds beautiful, Kale admitted, and terrifying for someone who was taught that every touch means something permanent, something binding. What if I touch you wrong? What if I misread what you want? What if you simply ask me? Thesha interrupted gently. What if we created our own language, our own customs? We don't have to be perfectly Zarathi or perfectly human. We could be something new. Something ours. The suggestion settled into him like warmth after cold. Something ours. Not a compromise but a creation. I'd like that, he said quietly. I'd like that very much. Then let's start over. Thesha extended her hand formally as if meeting him for the first time. Hello, Kale Winters. I'm Thesha of the Crystal Gardens line, explorer of new worlds and apparently very bad at reading human emotional cues. I'm your wife and I'd very much like to get to know you, truly know you, if you're willing. Kale stared at her offered hand for a heartbeat, then another. Then with deliberate care he reached out and took it. Her skin was warm, smoother than human skin but not unnaturally so, and the contact sent a jolt of awareness through him that was part fear, part exhilaration, and entirely overwhelming. Hello, Thesha of the Crystal Gardens line, he replied, managing a genuine smile. I'm Kale Winters, mediocre diplomat and apparently very skilled at self-sabotage. I'm your husband and I'm terrified of disappointing you, but I'd very much like to try not to. Her fingers tightened around his and her smile, when it came, was radiant enough to rival the stars beyond the viewport. Good, she said. That's a start. Bridges built. They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, neither quite sure what came next. Then Thesha laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze, and gently pulled him toward the seating area. Come. Sit with me. Let's do this properly. She arranged herself on the couch, tucking her legs beneath her in that fluid way she had, and patted the cushion beside her. We'll start with conversation. Very human, very safe. Tell me something I don't know about you. Kale sat hyper-aware of the mere foot of space between them, of how her subtle scent, something like rain and flowers he couldn't name, filled his senses. Something you don't know? That's harder than you think. You said you read my files. Files only tell me facts. Birth date, education, career trajectory. I want to know what makes you laugh. What you dream about. What you were like before you became Diplomat Winters. She shifted slightly, angling toward him. Tell me about young Kale. So he did. He told her about growing up in the coastal city of Portland, about his obsession with the ocean, about how he'd wanted to be a marine biologist until a chance encounter with an off-world trader had opened his eyes to the vastness beyond Earth's atmosphere. He told her about his sister, about family dinners that always ran too long and too loud, about the small apartment he'd left behind when he joined the diplomatic corps. Thesha listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed she was truly hearing him, not just waiting for her turn to speak. And when he finally ran out of stories about Earth and home, she began to share her own. She painted pictures with her words of Zerath Prime, a world of bioluminescent forests that sang with light at twilight, of crystal cities built into living mountains, of oceans that held memories in their depths. She told him about her childhood swimming in the memory seas, about her 3 siblings scattered across the galaxy, about the grief of leaving her homeworld but the excitement of discovery that pulled her toward the stars. I was always the restless one, she admitted, a fond smile playing at her lips. My parents used to joke that I was born with starlight in my blood. I wanted to see everything, meet everyone, understand all the ways life could be lived. Is that why you joined the cultural exchange program? Gil asked. Partially. But also because I believed in it, in us, the Alliance. Humans and Zerathi were not so different. We both look up at the stars and wonder. We both tell stories to make sense of the dark. We both. She paused, something soft entering her expression. We both long for connection even when we're terrified of it. Their eyes met and Kale felt something shift in his chest. This woman, this incredible, brave, patient woman, had been here all along, and he'd been too afraid to truly see her. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for wasting so much time. For making you feel unwanted when the truth is. He swallowed hard. The truth is I've been half in love with you for months and had no idea how to tell you. Thesha's eyes widened, their inner glow intensifying. Half in love. Maybe more than half, he admitted, feeling heat rise in his face. Watching you navigate diplomatic dinners with such grace, seeing how kind you are to everyone regardless of rank, the way you hum when you think no one's listening, how you always make sure I've eaten when I'm buried in work. He shook his head. You're extraordinary, Thesha. You always have been. I just didn't think I had the right to tell you. She was quiet for a moment and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. In Zerathi culture we have a saying, the brightest stars are the ones we reach for, not the ones we admire from afar. Wise words. Then stop admiring from afar, Kale Winters. It wasn't a demand but an invitation, soft and hopeful. Reach for me. Please. His heart hammered as he slowly extended his hand, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His fingertips brushed her cheek and she leaned into the touch, her eyes falling closed. Her skin was warm, impossibly soft, and he felt a slight vibration beneath his palm, something he'd read about, the subtle bioelectric field that all Zerathi possessed, responding to emotion. "Is this okay?" he whispered. "More than okay," she breathed, opening her eyes to meet his. "It's perfect." Emboldened, he let his fingers trace the line of her jaw, then thread into her silver hair. It felt like silk in starlight, and she made a soft sound of contentment that shot straight through him. "Your turn," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "Touch me. However you want." Thesha's smile was luminous as she raised both hands to frame his face, her touch featherlight and reverent. "I've wanted to do this for so long," she confessed. "To learn the shape of you, the warmth of you. To map the geography of someone who matters." She traced the line of his brow, the angle of his cheekbones, the curve of his ear. Her fingers found the tension in his jaw and gently massaged it away, then traveled down to rest against his neck, where his pulse beat frantically against her palm. "Your heart is racing," she observed. "Terrified," he admitted with a shaky laugh. "Me too." She shifted closer, erasing the last of the distance between them. "But it's a good kind of terror, isn't it? The kind that means something important is happening?" "The very best kind," he agreed. They spent the next hour simply touching, hands exploring faces, fingers intertwining and releasing, shoulders pressed together as they talked and laughed and shared the thousand small details that make up a life. Kale tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear and marveled at how such a simple gesture could feel so intimate. Thesha rested her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. It was careful and cautious and utterly perfect. As the ship's artificial night cycle deepened, they found themselves lying on opposite ends of the couch, facing each other, a blanket draped over both of them, their feet nearly touching in the middle. They were still talking, voices growing softer with exhaustion, but neither wanted the evening to end. "Thank you," Thesha murmured, her eyes growing heavy, "for finally letting me in." "Thank you for being patient enough to wait," Kale replied, fighting his own exhaustion. "For asking the question I was too afraid to answer on my own. We're going to be okay, aren't we?" It was half question, half statement. "Better than okay," he promised. "We're going to be extraordinary." Her smile was the last thing he saw before sleep claimed him, radiant, hopeful, and entirely meant for him. The breakthrough. 3 weeks passed in a haze of discovery. Kale and Thesha fell into new rhythms. Morning meals shared over steaming cups of earth coffee and Zarathi sun tea, evenings spent reading side by side on their couch, small touches that had become as natural as breathing. A hand on the small of her back as he passed behind her. Her fingers brushing his arm when she wanted his attention. Quick kisses on the cheek before they parted for their separate duties. It was sweet and careful and steadily building toward something more, though neither had quite found the courage to cross that final threshold. They still maintained separate sleeping arrangements, though Kale often woke to find they'd both migrated to the couch during the night, drawn together even in sleep. Then everything changed on a Tuesday, at least what passed for Tuesday on a ship that operated on Universal Standard Time. Kale was reviewing supply manifests in their quarters when the first alarm sounded. A sharp, mechanical blare that sent ice through his veins. Thesha looked up from her own workstation, eyes wide. "Emergency containment breach, Section 7, the ship's automated voice announced with eerie calm. All personnel shelter in place. Repeat, shelter in place. Hazardous atmospheric conditions detected." The lights shifted to emergency red, bathing everything in crimson shadows. "Section 7, that's 2 corridors over," Thesha said, already moving toward their emergency supplies. Years of training kicked in as they both pulled on respirator masks and checked the door seals. Another alarm, this one more urgent. The ship shuddered violently, throwing them both against the wall. Kale caught Thesha before she fell, pulling her against him as the vessel groaned like a living thing in pain. "Critical failure in stabilization systems," the automated voice continued. "Emergency bulkheads engaging. Warning, localized gravity fluctuations possible." The lights flickered, died, then came back at half strength. Through the small viewport in their door, Kale could see the corridor outside filling with a strange mist, coolant vapor from a ruptured line. He realized. They were trapped. "How bad is this?" Thesha asked, her voice muffled by the mask but steady. She'd been through emergency drills, but this was her first real crisis aboard a human vessel. "Bad," Kale admitted, checking his communicator. "No signal. The containment breach must have damaged the local network relays. But these quarters are designed to be safe rooms. We have oxygen for 72 hours, our own water recycling, emergency rations. We just have to wait it out." Another shudder rocked the ship, and this time the gravity did fluctuate. For a terrifying moment, they were weightless, floating in the red-lit darkness. Then it slammed back harder than normal, driving them to the floor. Kale felt his shoulder hit hard, pain radiating down his arm, but he kept his grip on Thesha, cushioning her fall. "Are you hurt?" she asked urgently, her hands already checking him over, professional and efficient. "Bruised, nothing serious." "You." "I'm fine." "Kale, I'm fine." But her voice trembled slightly, the first crack in her composure. They made their way to the couch, the safest spot away from any potential falling objects. Kale pulled the emergency kit from its storage compartment, checking supplies they hopefully wouldn't need: medical supplies, emergency beacon, survival rations. Everything was in order, but it didn't ease the tight knot of fear in his chest. Hours crept by. The ship continued to groan and shudder intermittently. Through their door's viewport, they could see the mist growing thicker, obscuring everything. Their communicators remained dead. They were alone in a pocket of safety, surrounded by chaos they couldn't see or control. Thesha tried to maintain her usual composure, but as night cycle descended, the lights dimming automatically despite the emergency, Kale could see fear etching lines around her eyes. When another violent shudder hit, she grabbed his hand, gripping it tight enough to hurt. "I've got you," he said softly, pulling her closer. "We're safe here. I promise." "You can't promise that," she whispered, and he heard the terror she'd been holding back. "We don't know what's happening out there. If the hull breach spreads, if the containment fails further, then we'll face it together," Kale interrupted firmly. He removed both their respirator masks, the air in their quarters was still clean, and tilted her chin up to meet his eyes. "Together, Thesha. You and me. Whatever happens." Something broke in her expression, all the careful control shattering. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice small. "I'm so scared, and I don't want to die having never truly been with you. Having never." He kissed her before she could finish, unable to hold back any longer. It wasn't gentle or careful. It was desperate and fierce and honest, months of longing compressed into a single moment. She made a sound of surprise that melted into relief, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair as she kissed him back with equal intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, her eyes were luminous in the emergency lighting. "I love you," he said, the words tumbling out urgent and unplanned. "I love you, Thesha. I should have said it weeks ago. I should have shown you every day since we started over, but I was still afraid, still holding back, and life is too short and too fragile to waste another moment pretending I don't feel what I feel." "I love you too," she breathed, and her smile was brilliant despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "I've loved you for so long, Kale. Even when you were keeping your distance, even when I thought it was hopeless, I loved you." They came together again, and this time there was no hesitation, no careful distance. Kale pulled her into his lap, his hands mapping the curve of her spine, the dip of her waist, every place he'd dreamed of touching. Thesha's fingers worked at the fastenings of his uniform jacket, urgent and clumsy, and he helped her, pulling it off and tossing it aside. "Are you sure?" he managed to ask, even as his hands found bare skin beneath her flowing garment, even as she arched into his touch. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said, and kissed him again. They made love there on the couch, surrounded by red emergency lighting and the distant groans of the distressed ship, and it was fumbling and imperfect and absolutely perfect all at once. Kale learned the language of her body, where to touch to make her gasp, how she trembled when he kissed the luminous patterns on her skin, the musical sounds she made when pleasure overtook her. She was patient with his inexperience with Zarathi physiology, guiding his hands, showing him without words what she needed. And when they finally came together completely, he felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of intimacy. This wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, a joining that transcended the merely flesh. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the blanket pulled over both of them, hearts still racing. Thesha traced patterns on his chest, her touch light and wondering. "In my culture," she said softly, "there's a word for this moment. Belthra. It means the recognition. When two people finally see each other truly and completely, without walls or fear or pretense." "Velthara," Kale repeated, testing the word. "I like that. Does it always happen like this?" She laughed, the sound warm against his skin. "No. Usually it's much less dramatic. But I think we've never done anything the conventional way, have we?" "True." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'm sorry it took a crisis to get me here. To get us here. Don't be sorry. We arrived when we were meant to." She shifted to look up at him, her eyes serious. "Kale, whatever happens out there, I need you to know. These months with you, even the difficult ones, have been the best of my life. You've given me something I didn't know I was searching for. What's that? Home, she said simply. Not a place but a person. You're my home. His throat tightened with emotion. You're mine too, he managed. My home, my heart, my feltaro. They held each other as the ship settled, the shudders growing less frequent, and eventually fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. No longer afraid of the darkness or the distance, no longer alone. The all-clear sounded 17 hours after the initial breach. By then, Kale and Thesha had woken to a ship that felt fundamentally different. Or perhaps it was they who had changed. The emergency lights had shifted back to normal, the mist in the corridors had cleared, and when Kale's communicator finally chirped to life, the messages were reassuring. Minor casualties all stable. The breach contained. Systems coming back online. They'd lain there in the restored quiet, reluctant to move, until duty finally called them both to their respective posts to help with recovery efforts. Now, 6 weeks later, Kale woke to soft morning light filtering through the viewport and the warmth of Thesha pressed against his side. They'd finally removed the second bed from their quarters, a decision that had felt both momentous and utterly natural. Her head rested on his chest, her silver hair spilling across his skin like liquid moonlight, and one of her hands was intertwined with his even in sleep. He marveled at how far they'd come. The careful politeness had evolved into easy intimacy. They'd learned each other's rhythms, how she needed quiet in the mornings while he woke energized and ready to talk, how he needed space after difficult diplomatic sessions while she processed by sharing every detail. They'd discovered shared passions. A love of ancient Earth music, a fascination with stellar cartography, a mutual addiction to terrible human romantic comedies that made Thesha laugh until she glowed. The physical intimacy that had once terrified him now felt like the most natural thing in the universe. He'd learned the geography of her body, the constellation patterns that marked her skin, the places that made her sigh or gasp or laugh with delight. She taught him the Zarathi art of Velmora, the touching meditation where couples would spend hours simply exploring each other with complete presence and focus, building intimacy layer by layer. They fought sometimes, usually over small things. Temperature preferences, work-life balance, her tendency to leave research materials scattered everywhere, his habit of reorganizing her organized chaos. But they'd learned to fight fair, to listen as much as they spoke, to remember that they were on the same side. Thesha stirred against him, her breathing shifting from the slow rhythm of sleep to waking awareness. She tilted her head back to look at him, and her smile was sleepy and content. "Good morning, husband," she murmured, the word carrying weight it hadn't before. Not an obligation or a title, but a choice renewed every day. "Good morning, wife," he replied, brushing a kiss across her forehead. "Sleep well. Always when I'm with you." She stretched, cat-like, then settled back against him. "What time is it?" "Early. We have an hour before the briefing." Perfect." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with those luminous violet eyes. "I've been thinking." "Dangerous," he teased, and she swatted his chest lightly. "Seriously? About what comes next? Our posting here ends in 3 months." Kale's stomach tightened slightly. They'd been avoiding this conversation, both aware of the approaching deadline. "I know. They've offered me a position on the new colony world, New Haven. It's a joint human Zarathi settlement, first of its kind. They want me to head up cultural integration." She paused, searching his face. "It's a 5-year commitment minimum. Remote location, pioneering conditions, basically building a society from scratch." "That sounds perfect for you," Kale said carefully, even as his heart sank. "You'd be incredible at it. I told them I needed to discuss it with you first." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining in that gesture that had become their constant language. "Because I'm not going anywhere without you, Kale. Not anymore. Wherever we go together." Relief flooded through him, so intense it was almost painful. "I was afraid you'd take it and I'd have to choose between my career and you. And I was afraid you'd be too noble to ask me to stay, that you'd let me leave to spare me the guilt of choosing." She laughed softly. "We really need to work on this communication thing. We really do." He pulled her down for a kiss, long and slow and sweet. "For the record, there's no choice. It's you. It'll always be you. If you want New Haven, I'll request a transfer. If you want to stay here, we'll stay. If you want to request a position on a research vessel exploring the outer rim, I'll learn to love zero gravity." Thesha's eyes brightened with unshed tears. "What if I told you they also offered you a position as chief diplomatic liaison for New Haven? They want both of us. Together. Together? Together. Building something new. creating a place where human and Zarathi children will grow up knowing each other as neighbors, as friends, as family. Where mixed couples like us won't be unusual but normal. Where? He kissed her again, unable to help himself. Yes. I haven't finished telling you about. Yes, he repeated, grinning. To all of it. To New Haven, to 5 years or 50, to building something extraordinary together. Yes. Her laugh was pure joy as she kissed him back, and they lost themselves in each other for a while, expressing in touch what words could never quite capture. Later, as they prepared for the day ahead, moving around each other in the efficient dance they developed, Thesha braiding her hair while Kale made coffee, him fastening the clasp of her necklace while she adjusted his collar, Kale caught sight of them in the mirror. They looked right together. Different species, different backgrounds, different in 1,000 ways that once seemed insurmountable. But also fundamentally matched. Two people who'd found each other across the vastness of space and chosen, every day, to build something beautiful together. What are you thinking? Thesha asked, catching his gaze in the mirror. That I'm grateful you asked, he said honestly. That night, weeks ago, when you asked why I hadn't touched you yet. I'm grateful you were brave enough to ask the question I was too afraid to answer. She turned to face him directly, taking both his hands in hers. And I'm grateful you were brave enough to finally answer. To let me in. To choose this, us, even when it scared you. It still scares me sometimes, he admitted. The depth of what I feel for you. How much you matter. How completely you've become essential to my existence. Good, she said firmly. Love should be a little terrifying. It means it's real, it matters, it's worth protecting. Her expression softened. But you don't have to protect yourself from me anymore, Kale. We're past that. We're home. Home. Not a planet or a place, but this. Her hand in his, her smile meant only for him, the absolute certainty that wherever they went next they'd face it side by side. We're home, he agreed and pulled her close for one more kiss before duty called them both away. As they walked together toward the briefing room, fingers intertwined, Kale thought about that first question. Why haven't you touched me yet? And the answer he'd finally learned to give. Not in words but in actions. Not in grand gestures but in daily choices. Not in promises but in presence. He touched her now because she was his Velthara, his recognition, his home. He touched her because intimacy wasn't something to fear but something to celebrate. He touched her because she'd asked, because she'd waited, because she'd been brave enough to bridge the distance when he couldn't. And he would keep touching her, holding her hand through diplomatic negotiations, wrapping his arms around her after long days, exploring her with wonder in their private moments, for the rest of their extraordinary, beautiful, perfectly imperfect lives together. The ship hummed around them, carrying them forward toward new horizons, new challenges, new opportunities to build the life they were choosing together. And Kale had never been more certain of anything than he was of this. Whatever came next, wherever they went, they would face it together. Always together. Never alone. Home. The end.